Well, welcome. Thank you, diehards, for the last session here at CA World. My name is Nick Nikols. I am CTO for cybersecurity here at CA Technologies, and I really wanted to touch base with all of you around what we're talking about today with regard to hybrid environments. What's going on with both cloud and on-premise within a lot of these organizations. And so just to begin with, I wanted to kind of get a sense of a show of hands as to how many of you are really spending anywhere above 50% on cloud technologies today? Any? We got such a great sampling here, so. Well, we're finding more and more that this is becoming commonplace. This is becoming the new normal. This is not something that's unusual, and this really gets to the point of today's topic. So in most of my conversations with many IT organizations, a common theme has been around the challenges of securing these hybrid environments, which leads me to the panel that we have here today. And so representing a range from everything from state government to the financial sector to enterprise software, we have Matthew Vince, our Chief Design Officer from the State of Louisiana. We also have Indranil Ghosh,
Hi,
who is GM for Icici Bank. And we have Mahendra Durai, who is our own CIO from CA Technologies.
hello.
So thank you guys for participating. And to begin our discussion, I'd like to each ask of you, to give us a little bit of background around, what's going on in your environment and what has been your approach to these hybrid environments, and what are some of the challenges that you're facing in securing these environments. And Matthew, I'll start with you.
Sure. So in Louisiana, we are very much a hybrid organization. We have a lot of investment in on-premise technology. We've got mainframes. We've got Nutanix in place now. We also have some cloud, and I think our strategy going forward really is to design for the cloud, understand what that means, design systems that work well in the cloud, but maybe not go there yet. Look at it we have a complicated cost structure in the state of Louisiana. We have to make sure it's cost effective. We have to make sure we're designing for workloads that work well in the cloud, and also that are secure. We have a lot of different data in the state that we are in charge of protecting, and several different rules and laws and regulations around that data. So it's very important that we understand where our data is going and how we secure it.
Very good. Indranil?
Yeah, so I represent ICICI Bank, which is the largest bank, a private sector bank in India. It manages around 100 billion plus assets with around 75,000 employees and 4,500 odd branches and 15,000 odd ATMs. Essentially for us, anything which is core to the bank is something that we keep on premise. And all the other services which either we are partnering or we are trying out with our partners in the ecosystem, we want to put it in the cloud. Anything which is on our test environment or on the development environments, again, we would typically put it on the cloud because that may need some sort of a short-term or an immediate provisioning requirements, and hence it's much more easier to provision for it on demand. And that's why we kind of follow a hybrid model where core functions which are completely internal, consumed internally would be in-premise, and the rest of them would be on the cloud.
Very good. And Mahendra?
So for CA, just in terms, I think everybody's aware of the company itself, but in terms of the application profile, employees, etc., we support about 14,000 plus employees. Given that we are a software company, we have about 100,000 plus network IPs that we support and manage. Given that we have 6,000 plus developers in our organization, there's a significant amount of environment that is being built for development, the development testing of our products itself, and then from a IT standpoint, all the applications, et cetera, that enable the productivity of our own employees, as well as all the integrations for our customers. So that's fundamentally a makeup of our environment. I think in terms of the business challenges and approaches, we are, like everybody else, undergoing a digital transformation. As a company, we are adapting to the demands of our digital customer base and being able to change our business processes, systems, et cetera, to be able to be more focused and more relevant to that changing demographic of our customers. So that's from a business standpoint. As it pertains to cloud, I'd categorize it into three areas: the traditional SaaS, PaaS, and infrastructure as a service. We've been down this journey for a while now, so I'm going to say so we have our strategy that we build out that's based on about a 3-year window. Our last version of our strategy used to actually have cloud first as a core pillar of how we looked at our applications and our data and our environment. That one, it doesn't exist as part of our strategy anymore because it's now become table stakes. So, we moved from cloud first to actually enabling an open enterprise where, cloud is part and parcel of how we operate and deliver our services. So when we look at our overall application architecture, about 50% of our applications are software as a service or hosted in the cloud. And then we have another maybe 45% of the applications on premise. So we've been down that journey for quite some time. Just to give you guys a little bit of a context, just with AWS, we spend over $5 million a year just in terms of consuming their capacity, just for infrastructure as a service and some of the analytics. So definitely that went from 0 to 5 million in literally about 2.5 years. So that's the amount of investments we've been putting into infrastructure as a service. And we also have Azure, obviously, a lot of SaaS applications.
Okay, very good. So in your experience and as you've been rolling out these services, what's been your level of confidence that you've had in dealing with these different cloud, whether it's SaaS applications or whether it's infrastructure as a service or even private cloud for that matter? How much of this is an issue of control at this point, or how much of it is really about enablement?
So I think it is a lot about control. Our federal partners in the state are calling for kind of a cloud-first approach to put everything in the cloud, and we're a little uncomfortable with that approach. However, they're also saying to build more modularly, develop systems and components, and then those components should also be SaaS offerings or other hosted systems. And so all of a sudden we find ourselves in a distributed world where there's, half of our infrastructure may not be under our control. It may not, it's any of the star as a service kind of things.
Right.
And so by putting in central controls and being able to expand those controls outward to take CA tools as an example for IAM solution, to push that back out to some of our SaaS providers for the Medicaid space or for any other space really, being able to expand out that way. And also from an infrastructure side, we put some big investments in Nutanix and really in NSX from VMware, which will allow us to treat the cloud virtually as if it's our own. So from our infrastructure team's approach, it's the same tools, it looks the same. We can expand out, expand back just as seamlessly as we can internally. So.
Fantastic, fantastic. Mahendra?
So from our standpoint, from a security profile, to specifically answer your question, we wrestled through the control challenges, quite a bit. I think from an infrastructure perspective, we've moved past the server huggers. And
I like that term.
And then from a legal standpoint and from a finance finance standpoint, we've gotten past the data huggers, right? So I think we're probably gotten over those aspects. And because interestingly, what you see more and more with the cloud providers, they understand the fact that security is a core enabler for their business model. And not having a good, strong security strategy is going to be an impediment for their growth. And so, frankly, when you look at software as a service vendors, they have more controls, more compliance, more governance around all the certifications they get around their data centers, et cetera. And you see vendors like Microsoft actually espousing the benefit of their security and the intelligence that they're applying as a differentiator on why more and more customers should be moving to the cloud. So that's becoming more and more mainstream. I believe that'll become part and parcel of how security is is adhered to. Some of the challenges we had at the initial stages were things like around identity management, provisioning, deprovisioning identities, and whether it be with infrastructure as a service or software as a service. That definitely was a challenge. I think our products definitely have also matured and evolved to be able to provision and deprovision in the cloud as well as on-prem. So that area is definitely getting more mature. So what it did was it definitely created more processes on our side to be able to, and a lot of it was initially manual, then we wrote our own automation, then the technology caught up. So that's been the phase, especially if you're an early adopter or probably more on the leading edge of adopting cloud. Those are the adjustments we had to incorporate. So it was a combination of fundamentally transforming our workforce to also learn new approaches, new techniques in terms of how we manage our vendor management practices, how we write our contracts. All those things had to be modified. So that was about 3 years ago. Now it's becoming more mainstream. When we do negotiations with contracts with our vendors, we have a boilerplate in terms of what we look for. So we've definitely gone to a model where we actually have a governance dashboard where we look at cloud providers and rate them based on security, what they have in terms of data protection, availability, all of these things, and we are constantly, and we built in processes to fundamentally drive governance, periodically audit their processes, et cetera. So it's definitely created a new approach and channel in terms of how we address it, but for all intents and purposes, my opinion is the context has become to a place where they are definitely secure. You do give up a little bit of control in terms of being able to look into like the logs of an application, et cetera, like a Salesforce or an Office 365. But the other benefit we are seeing, and this is partially related to security, we are beginning to apply the aspects of what we call consumption analytics, right? Because now how we use the software is becoming more and more available. So in terms of what we call the user journey, in terms of adoption, we're driving more maturity along those areas and getting better also. So those are the benefits we are also beginning to see from a cloud paradigm.
Well, and clearly it's also becoming less and less of a challenge from a perspective of most of these cloud-based services are bringing a lot of really great best practices to the table, and so that gives more confidence in leveraging these services. However, there's also this is kind of a give and take in the sense that while we're consuming these services, we're also sharing a whole lot more information with both of our the identity information and other information with the services themselves. And so how do you feel about the need to keep tabs on kind of what's going on with that data, since it's now outside of your realm?
Yeah.
So very clearly, it's no longer a question of are we comfortable or not. I mean, that's the way to go. If you look at the ecosystem, I mean, it requires information on demand. It's no longer about are we comfortable. Yes, there's a journey of learning which we are going along as we are putting more and more and exposing more and more of these services. So the way we've approached this in ICICI Bank is very, very differently, where we are building a set of microservices which are exposed on the cloud through a sandbox for our partner ecosystem to just consume it. We've done around 100 plus of these services. What we've done is we've broken them into very, very small. So essentially these are microservices. So there could be one which is just a balance inquiry. There could be one which just tells you the status of your card or your bank account. One related to your transfers. One related to your account statements. And because they are all exposed, they are as flexible as if they are on the cloud. And any of our partner in the ecosystem can pick it up and can put it in any combination that he or she wants and can stitch them to create his or her own app or his or her own service that he wants to offer to the customers. That is powering a lot of innovation on the digital front for not only our customers, but also their customers who are using our services. The entire objective is to how do we create these services which is completely frictionless, which is not even in many cases known by the end customer, that it's actually being serviced by the bank. And that's why the entire hybrid model comes in. Security, as I said, is a continuous journey. What we believed was secure, I think 6 months ago, there are so many new things that we've discovered in the journey in the last 6 months, is what we are evolving. The best thing is, cloud itself has opened up so many new things for us to learn, which we are now applying on-prem. See, the line between what is an insider and what's an outsider has blurred. Your own employees come in with BYOD, they suddenly look like an outsider. What is hosted inside and what is hosted outside has also blurred completely.
Exactly.
So it's no longer a thick line which you could have drawn. Those lines have gone away. So the beauty is the learnings of cloud are getting applied on the on-premise. The on-premises learnings that we had for so many years are being applied on cloud wherever applicable, and a more sophisticated model is emerging. I'm not saying it's a very, very mature model because the entire journey itself has started, but it's an exciting thing where we're learning a lot and we're applying it on the others.
Well, and I think that your example is a perfect example for showing how digital transformation can really take advantage of these capabilities by exposing these components as small consumable chunks. And you were referring to them as microservices, but you can almost think about this in the terms of like a serverless model where it's just the functionality that you need at the time that you need it, but making it so easily consumable and reusable that now you can build new services with confidence. That's employing these security capabilities as an inherent part is, I think, an aspect that will really help accelerate this kind of transformation in many, many ways. So I think that's a great example, and I think that's also showing where we can do a whole lot more from a hybrid deployment where it can benefit both cloud-based as well as on-premise environments.
And
yes.
You touched on something that's pretty critical for the state, and that's really around the concept of data governance. So we all know, and we can see from a technology practitioner standpoint, the cloud's where we're going to go, and building systems that work well in the cloud, integrating systems outside of the cloud, that all makes a whole lot of sense. What doesn't keep up, though, is the laws governing the data that we have to be responsible for. That's right. We have, as many federal partners and state laws, from CJIS to HIPAA to Pub 1075, IRS. We have a state law currently right now, State of Louisiana, that says for certain education data, it's a Student Privacy Act, that name, address for a student, that data cannot leave the state of Louisiana. So from just a strict networking standpoint, that's basically impossible. So how do we even build around a cloud structure if I can't even ship the data off, outside of the state of Louisiana?
Right. And
from a bigger picture, our customers are our agencies. It's their data. It's they're responsible for where that data goes. From a service provider model, we have to make sure we're being very good stewards of that data. So we have to make sure if we want to put something in the cloud, we have to be very sure that we're not in breach of some other law or some other problem that may rear its head, whether that's shipping data outside the continental United States or really wherever. And so that's one of our biggest challenges, is how do we normalize and align some of the legal proceedings, the laws around data. And I know the federal government's doing a little bit there with some of their standards, and I think the state has a long way to go, and that's a lot of negotiation at our legal level between our agencies and from a real data governance standpoint.
Well, and given these data governance concerns, I mean, how does that impact your ability to audit and track how all of this is being used?
Absolutely. So it's one of those things that once we ship it off to the cloud, what happens to it, right? You mentioned before, we don't really get access into a lot of those logs. We don't know what's happening on the back end. We can do things like a SOC 2 Type 2. We do that for any of our third-party providers that are going to be a SaaS, but it's difficult for us to really get introspection at that level that we need, and to be comfortable to go back to our agencies and say, hey, look, your data is going to be fine. We put controls in place, and so that's really our next big challenge: is how do we make sure we can provide enough really visibility into the traversal of that data, where it travels, where it's stored, how many copies, all those things, and really the transmission back and forth. And it's going to be a complicated future for us.
How about you, Mahendra? I mean, is this a concern that you have to deal with the auditors?
Absolutely, and I think what the cloud did for us was actually help us relook at our data governance, data classification practices, and actually drive stronger standards, both on-prem as well as outside. So it started out by looking at the entire contractual landscape to, for example, Matt was talking about not being able to see what's going on with the vendor. So the only way you're able to get better optics is if you have good contractual terms that where they have to notify you if they have some hack or violations, etc. So that was actually an offshoot of getting more mature. And then coming up with a strong governance model and actually building bench strength to be able to drive cloud governance. And actually those things helped us become a much more focused organization, not only just worrying about information that was not on-prem, but also how we were protecting data on-prem. And getting a little bit more into the tactical front, what the cloud has allowed us to do is definitely look at data in motion, data at rest, apply the right practices, approaches, etc. And the great thing is, for example, if you take encryption, with the cloud, if where we started out, where we didn't have consistent encryption, being able to drive consistent encryption was a breeze because you could stand up new capacity, move it over to encrypted stores, and then shut down the other stuff. Compared to if you were to do that, on-prem, it takes much longer, etc. So those are all some of the benefits as well as the evolutions that we had to incorporate to make sure that our data was protected.
So do you have any data privacy concerns where you're having to tokenize the data when you're leveraging any of these cloud-based services?
Yeah, so definitely, right? So all the principles that we talk about in terms of good foundational security practices that you should apply definitely create more rigor when it comes to the cloud, right? Whether it be privileged access management or how data is categorized and how it's managed. So one of the things that our journey into the cloud brought about was actually creating what we call our crown jewels. Categorizing data because you quickly realize there's so much information that you can't fundamentally try and protect everything. So we categorize our crown jewels. It falls under 5 categories, whether it be financial, customer data, personally identifiable information, source code, etc. And then, adopting evolved and enhanced approaches in how we protect that data.
Okay, very good. Well, Indranil, I can imagine what you have to deal with as being a bank. I'm sure that it's all of this times 10. So could you give us a little bit of insight into what you have to deal with?
So obviously, as I said, the security is of paramount importance because we are the custodians. The way we look at it, we are custodians of others' data. Fact that we have a global footprint adds to the complexity. We deal with regulators from UK, FAS, MAS in Singapore. Each of them have their own complexities, and obviously we host them all in a single location out of India. So that's the entire complexity is, as I said, is also a challenge. As well as the way we look at it is it gives us an opportunity because each of these regulators come back with new insights around the data protection, around the data masking and so on and so forth, which we then look at if it actually is a best practice. We would go and uniformly apply it on all. And in fact, our own on-prem data center is a lights out data center. It has a very lean staff of less than 10 people who are managing these data center from electricity and other power. And if there's ever need of physical reboot, beyond that, everybody has remote access. So it's as good as it's on the cloud. And hence, as I said, we do not differentiate between whether a particular thing is on cloud, it's on hybrid, as I said, exposed on the cloud, rendered from internal, or it is core internal and is exposed on the internal.
So you're really getting to the point where it's abstracted away, it doesn't matter.
It's a completely abstracted layer where the security is uniformly applied.
That's fantastic. So, well, also another interesting angle on what you deal with too is how you're leveraging this to deliver services to your customers. So it's not just about leveraging the cloud for your own benefit as far as your own internal operations, but you're betting the business on this.
Yes.
So can you give a little bit more insight into that?
So in fact, it's not only just us leveraging and exposing our services. Let me give you the example of the biggest national identity program that is run by our government. That's called Aadhaar. That, when it gets completed, would cover 1.2 billion people in this. And that entire service is being run on the cloud by the government. What they have done is, so we started our journey of enrolling national identity quite late. So what we had an advantage is, because we started late, we could get the best practices that were already there. And so the government got in technocrats from industry and asked them to build this for them. They have on day one exposed these all as APIs, which can be consumed by anyone. So we as banks, for example, are leveraging on that. When I open an account for anybody, I just take his Aadhaar number and I can open his account without any paper. So that gives me an advantage of going to his doorsteps, doing the KYC for him then and there. KYC is know your customer for us, and his account is opened instantly. It's completely paperless. It has multiple modes by which I could authenticate him. It could be an OTP, it could be biometric, a retina, or a fingerprint. And so the modes are more and more. The second biggest advantage of this entire service on the cloud is now more and more agencies, exactly what you are aiming for, are hooking onto it. So today you need your passport, your Aadhaar is a must. And there's a fast track queue which comes in. Because you are enrolled on the Aadhaar, you are able to get your passport in less than 7 days, as compared to something which would have taken you around 20 days. If you want to pay your taxes, Aadhaar is a must. And you don't have to file any physical returns. The electronic return comes to you, everything is completely electronic. And it happens in less than 2 days. So the benefits are immense.
Yes.
And the beauty of it is, as I said, so the entire ecosystem is gearing up for seamless delivery through clouds which are interconnected to each other. We are, the way we believe, we are an important part of the entire ecosystem, but we are consuming as well as exposing our services, and hence it becomes an interlinked mesh which keeps growing on its own.
That's fantastic. Well, another thing that I think is interesting, and I'd like to get your reaction to this, Matthew, is so this whole notion of the national ID. I mean, when you start talking about state government, I'm kind of curious as to, you're having to deal with citizens at that level as well. What aspects of this really help facilitate that?
Well, I don't know that we'll go so far as going to national ID.
Well, national, but state.
But one of the bigger things here when we talk about government, our citizens really see the government as a single entity, when in reality it's separate organizations with their own structure, their own governance. And so we understand the complexities of integrating all these different systems and all these different agencies. But from a customer and citizen point of view, it really shouldn't matter. And so one of our goals here is to start to design systems, whether that's through the use of on-premise, cloud, whatever it may be, that really starts to present a more seamless experience for our citizens. This idea of the single sign-on, I think it's as close to the a national ID type model, where it's that one account you have to understand. The one account, your credentials follow you along with you, system to system. It's not a whole new set of, it's a whole new email address, a whole new everything. It's one. And that's one of our big goals here, is to get that single sign-on view. Because what that allows us to do, that with the very strong master data management approach, is to really start to get a central account, a central picture of a citizen throughout all of our systems. Because today there's several places data comes in. You go to renew your driver's license, we may take your new address, you file your taxes, you get some information there. Maybe you get social services, your information's there. Nothing's really going back after the fact and trying to align all those systems together. So we have 15 different viewpoints of what Matt Vince looks like in the state of Louisiana.
Exactly, yes.
So how do we start to normalize that? I think that starts with these core set of services we're starting to build, this single sign-on, this master data management. How do we start to give that single point of view from a citizen?
Well, and I think that's key, and that's sort of why I brought it up, is that identity is really a multifaceted capability, if you will, and so you need to bring all these elements together, but have them all coordinated so that way it looks seamless, and that you're sharing the information between all these different departments, and that you're getting the results without having to force the bifurcation happening at the user side. So you want to give the user a seamless, frictionless experience, and make this all transparent to them. So it makes it really easy, but at the same time, there's all sorts of stuff going on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. You say it all the time. You go to get your new driver's license and you say, why can't I also change my voter registration, or why can't I change? It doesn't make sense that you can't, when in reality, there's a whole lot of reasons why you can't, because the systems don't talk. There's no real governance or law that governs that. So getting from where we are today to that new vision of that single portal, that unified account, that's really one of our bigger goals here. And there's something that you touched on earlier that I did want to come back to.
Okay.
We've put together a comprehensive information security policy. And you talked about contracts and really trying to enforce that at the contract level, and that's been one of our shoehorns, I guess, into this, is to start to take the ISP. It basically takes all of the data we have, classifies it into 5 levels: restricted, classified, et cetera. Doesn't matter if it's CGIS, if it's HIPAA, PHI, that they're all kind of high-level grouped together into 5 categories. We insert that into our contracts and have that be the lever that helps us get some traction there. We also have an auditing policy that can allow a third-party auditor to go in. But I think one of our challenges we're seeing is we're a small enterprise on this stage. I mean, we have 4.6 million citizens, you've got 1.2 billion, right? So orders of magnitude difference. And so sometimes when we go to negotiate with some providers, it's difficult to have negotiations because they can essentially shut the door on us and say, you're not worth our time. And so we have to come strong with from a data governance standpoint, but sometimes we do have to make some decisions about whether or not we play or we don't play.
Well, actually, that brings up a really good point too, is that as enterprises adopt cloud-based services, what happens when things don't quite work out? What's your fallback strategy? How are you going to protect yourself in spite of the fact that now you're dealing with a service provider that maybe isn't living up to your standards or is causing you grief in some other fashion, and you're still having to shell out that money? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it starts with having the right contractual terms. So whether it be with vendors we are writing a new contract with, or actually going and retrofitting all of our contracts, because some of these things we didn't think about when we signed the deal with Salesforce 7, 8, 9 years ago. So now we have to go back and make sure that those conditions, and I think what we're seeing with cloud vendors, they're open to it. They understand that custody of data has to come into play when a customer is dissatisfied with the service, et cetera. So that's becoming more mainstream. They're willing to, they make it a little bit difficult. It's got to happen within 30 days, and we'll give it to you in this form or that form. But I think that part is coming together fairly well, at least in North America. So that's one part. And then we actually have had situations where we had to move services away from one cloud provider to another cloud provider, and it's frankly not as difficult. So I think things have matured to a place where we archive off that data, and the interesting thing is, even if it's terabytes of information, now that we have other cloud providers, you can quickly copy that over, and and solutions like Nutanix, et cetera, allow you to move workloads between cloud providers. So that's becoming definitely much more standard.
Okay.
We haven't moved something as large as, let's say, Salesforce.
Yeah.
But I think definitely in terms of both governance as well as contractual terms and technology, I think that's not as difficult as we thought it would be.
Okay. Well, and another thing, I mean, I think that's very interesting, because I've also heard some customers have had to actually withdraw and pull it back on-prem because of certain circumstances and deal with that. So that's another strategy that can be employed. And actually, Matthew, I mean, you were talking earlier about how you were really leveraging things so that way you can put things in private cloud or have them outside where appropriate, but you wanted it to be consistent. So could you elaborate?
Right, so the idea would be that we design for workloads that work in any location. They should be location agnostic.
Right.
It shouldn't care that it's on-premise or in the cloud. It should be designed in a way that it can work anywhere. And that's really easier to do in a cloud environment. We're talking about more of an infrastructure as a service. And I know you mentioned those 30-day transition periods. One of our big concerns for the state is if we've outsourced something in a SaaS model where we've taken a core function and pushed that out to another system. A 30-day transition puts us in a pretty serious, we're behind the 8 ball there, so to speak.
Sure.
Because it may have taken us 3 years to get that system in place, and to say that we're going to get it moved off somewhere in 30 days is very, very difficult. And in some cases, they can have years and years of data and records and all kinds of things in there that we would have to have some sort of plan to move. And our CTO and I have had many discussions about strategies behind that. Normally we'll do a code escrow, which is great, although what good is source code if I have no idea how to run it, right? So we talked about infrastructure escrows, where we actually understand how that system is deployed, have a way to deploy that out to a cloud system if we needed to.
Is that kind of like a gold master that you have,
Essentially, kind of
a
like
well-known configuration? Or?
That's one approach. We have another approach where we're talking about actually having a smaller scale stand-up system running all the time. That's basically kill switch enabled, so it's maybe separate rack space, what have you, but there's a lot of different approaches now that we have available to us because the affordability of cloud gives us way more options. And we may have to run on a lower scale for a little while, but it's much more easy to swallow than having to just stop operations for some period of time.
Okay, very good. Indranil, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so as Mahendra put, obviously contractual agreements are there, and that does form the crux of it. But the way we are moving, and as I said, most of our partners in the ecosystems are moving, is from to a clear SLA-driven service. So it's all linked to the SLA. As long as the service level is maintained, as long as the service level is being tracked, and there are enough and more tools which are able to give us real-time reports and dashboards today. So you are able to see it on real time. What is the service level that is being met? And it's not just one metric. There are multiple metrics that we're meeting, and we're seeing it real time for the end customer. So what is it that the end customer is getting? What is the response time that he's getting? And that gives us an ability to track that service level with the end provider. And hence, even well before we reach a completely degraded state where you say, I have to divorce, I think that helps us do course correction much faster. I don't think anybody wants to sour a relationship just for the heck of it, right? It's that you take a action very late. That's when correction takes much longer. With real-time dashboards, with a lot more analytics, we are able to track those much faster. We're able to engage with those partners much more quicker, and the entire terms of the contracts are defined in such a way that if the SLA is met, that's when we move on to the next step. And that helps us, safeguard or ring fence a lot of these things. Obviously, technology does allow us to seamlessly move away. We have some solutions which we have on a distributed network where some components run on one cloud and the other runs on the other cloud.
Right.
That does help minimize or reduce the risk. So it's a mix of all of these.
That sounds very good. Well, so we have time for one more question. So what advice would each of you give your peers facing similar challenges? And I'll start with you, Mahendra.
Sure. I think when we look back at our journey, you got to look at it comprehensively. And when I say comprehensively, start from the contract to the full life cycle of the application, the service, the data, etc. So that was something that I would suggest. The other detail is I think you have to transform to accommodate the hybrid enterprise. And when I say transform to accommodate the hybrid enterprise, it's about the people and the processes. I think that's where you get the resistance or adoption. And so being able to create career paths, career opportunities for individuals within your teams, et cetera, definitely drives faster adoption, people becoming more invested in making that hybrid model successful. So I think that our biggest lesson learned was definitely in terms of not focus on and it always is the case, technology is only 20-25% of the solution. It's always the people and the processes. So retooling, retraining, and creating an organization that is built for the cloud or built for hybrid is really what I would pass on.
Fantastic. Indranil?
So two lessons which we've learned. You have to start somewhere. So my advice to the people here is start somewhere. Even if you think it's too small for the organization, start the journey. You would reach somewhere at the end of the exercise. So that's most important. You cannot sit back and think that I will do something big bang and hence keep waiting. You'll miss the bus. The other is, see, whether we like it or not, the fintechs, the mobility, all of that is on us. Now it's up to us whether we leverage and we partner with them or we feel threatened by them. at least in the bank, we've taken a different approach where we've exposed, as I said, a lot of these microservices, and we're realizing that a lot of these fintechs are actually coming back and partnering with us instead of what I believed had we lived in a shell, they would have tried creating something on their own. So the entire ecosystem, if it partners, is a win-win for everyone. And as long as I am adding value, they would love to partner with me. If I am not going to add value and I'm going to remain in a shell, I am the one who's going to lose out on that. My customers are going to lose out. So cloud is the way to go. Each of us will have to take a different model, whole hog, partial, or, as I said, a stepping stone. Our own sense is whole hog is still not the way to go. So we've taken an approach of a hybrid, as I said, something which is very, very core to the bank, like our core banking, etc., would remain in premises because that's very critical and is typically not exposed. Wherever we put layers over it, we expose it on the cloud. And as I said, the test and devs are easy kills and hence are put on the cloud where you need to burst capacities, where you need to put something on demand, somebody needs to put something on a week, where we are experimenting with our partners, where something needs to be set up. We don't even know whether it's going to take off or not. We would put it on the cloud and test it.
Fantastic. Matthew.
So I'm going to copy all those answers. No, but really,
That's the benefit of going last.
I think Mahendra touched on a great point that's very applicable to the state. It's one of our lessons learned. It's really about the people. We're sitting at a spot where we have about 1 in 4 of our employees can retire right now if I say the wrong thing. And they're out the door, right? And we also have, it's difficult for us to hire new people. It's difficult to bring new talent to the state when we're talking about mainframes and all that. No one wants to do that right now, not out of college. And so understanding, when we talk about hybridization, we talk about bringing things in, hyper-converged, Nutanix and cloud, all of a sudden, the silos we had at the state, the silos of networking and storage and VM, that doesn't matter anymore. And we're learning that on the application side too, when you bring in things like DevOps and all this, all of a sudden everybody's an app developer. And so the lines blur completely, and for us, that's a hard lesson learned because we don't operate that way. And I think the other one that we've learned really here is we need to start thinking about systems that will be coming. To plan for that future step, whatever that next technology might be, we can't predict the future, but we have some very good indicators of where things might be going. If we design for the ones today, which we typically do at the state, next thing you know, we're 3 years behind and we just started, right? And that's something we can't do. And I think one of our biggest challenges is really to look at everything that's out there. You look at Docker and some of the promises there, the world of DevOps and the hybrid cloud, there's so many great opportunities there. And I think for us to not take advantage of that, not think about where that could be, even if it's not applicable today, it will be.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, again, I can't thank you guys enough. Matthew, Indranil, Mahendra, everyone, thank you very much for giving us your insights and your experiences on this. In closing, I think it's really interesting. I mean, we look at this and, hybrid really is the new normal. This isn't, something foreign anymore. And I think that there's a number of things that we can take away from this. I mean, if we were having this conversation a few years ago, things were a little bit different. I think there would be a lot more talk, and I'm actually kind of fascinated by the fact that we're not having conversations around trust as much at this point. Also, SLA agreements and things like this, all that's pretty much been worked out. And also, relative to the only thing that really was a concern is sometimes where the data might reside is still a concern that we have to think about. But I think that's a thing that we have to think about no matter what anyway. I mean, it doesn't really matter about what the deployment is. It's that what's the appropriateness for where this data should reside should be a paramount question, regardless of whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. But I also think that it's clear that with all of these capabilities that we're bringing to bear and these new services that we're able to deliver as part of this, we're all in this together. And I think that this is something that we can really learn from each other on and really be able to leverage to accelerate, what I think is very much a bright new future following this approach. So again, thank you very much, and thank you all for sitting in on this panel. And have a great rest of CA World. I hope you all enjoy the concert this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you.